Really quickly, guys, before the video gets started, I want to once again mention the fact that I do have a Twitch channel over at Gaming Logically. That is the name over on Twitch. I streamed over 40 hours this past week, so this is not something that's just like a hobby for me. It's something that I am seriously pursuing, starting to gain some momentum over there. A lot of you guys are coming over and dropping follows, coming to watch the stream, and I would encourage you, if you have not done that already, to please do that as well. End of rant. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's video is a continuation of my NBA season preview series for the 2019-20 NBA season, and this one covers the New York Knicks. The Knicks are coming off of a 17-65 season, and it was their sixth straight without a postseason appearance. They went all in tank mode in an effort to try and land the #1 pick and Zion Williamson, and obviously that didn't work, but they did still add some interesting young pieces this offseason, and certainly had one of the most intriguing and maybe confusing offseasons in the NBA. So let's go ahead and review that offseason, and let's begin by talking about some additions, and most specifically, their highest draft pick, RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett is someone that a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on, and it kind of varies from very high ceiling to why do people even like this player at all. And in my opinion, I'm in the camp of he's a very, very talented player. Like this time last year, a lot of people thought that RJ Barrett would be the #1 overall pick, had some really good performances in international play for Canada, most specifically against Team USA, and he has all the talent in the world as a playmaker and as a scorer. He's a good but not great athlete, someone that has good size, and again, all of the skills that you would need to be a potential future all-star in the NBA. The questions are, can he change his mentality from some things that he showed at times in college, most specifically being a little bit selfish, and can he prevent himself from jacking up so many shots and actually look at his teammates? Because he is a good passer, it just is a question at this point whether he is a willing passer. And you'd rather have someone at least have that skill and then work on their ability to actually pass the ball than not even have that skill at all. But my question here is, are the Knicks really the best placed for RJ Barrett to be to reach his NBA potential? Because he's not going to have a ton of talent around him initially early in his career, so that might continue to reinforce that bad habit of just jacking up shots and not trusting his teammates around him. So I definitely think he could be a great NBA player. I think he could be an all-star. I think he could even push for an all-NBA team depending on how things go, simply because he is so skilled. But I'm just not convinced that New York is necessarily the place for him to develop that, even though I'm hopeful that it will be, and we'll just kind of have to wait and see on him. Next up is an offseason free agent addition for the Knicks, and it is Bobby Portis. And he's been a productive front court player for the last couple of seasons and has a really nice and interesting inside-out game that could provide a lot of value to a certain team. At this point, in my opinion, he's a really good sixth-man front court scoring option coming off the bench for a good team, even though obviously he could start for some teams depending on the situation. And again, just provides really nice value because of his scoring ability in the front court. So given that, as well as his age and the contract, I do like this pickup for the Knicks. Next up is another front court addition as a free agent, and I didn't understand this one at all. It's Taj Gibson, and if you're thinking about him as just like a veteran locker room presence guy, someone that's going to be there to help the young guys develop, then this kind of makes sense to bring him in. But other than that, I'm really not sure what they were doing here, because they brought in so many other front court players, a lot of which fit their timeline a lot better, and I'm not really sure how it helps them to give Taj Gibson very many, if any, minutes at all. In terms of on the floor, I guess he could provide them some backup 5 minutes, but some of their other front court players can just play up a position behind Mitchell Robinson, which you'll see as we get more towards the depth chart, but things are just really confusing here in terms of why they brought in Taj Gibson, again, unless it's just as a veteran presence locker room guy. Next up now in terms of additions is, shocker, another front court player, and this one is Marcus Morris. And even before he flipped his commitment originally from the Spurs and then to the Knicks as a free agent, the Knicks had a pretty crowded front court. Now that doesn't mean he doesn't provide value to them as a front court scorer, someone that provides them toughness, can shoot a little bit from the outside as well as in the mid-range. It's just a tough-minded player. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if by mid-season he isn't entirely happy in New York, certainly not as happy as he would have been in San Antonio, given all of the losing, as well as the fact that I'm imagining the Knicks are going to prioritize giving minutes to their younger front court players rather than Morris. And he could also potentially be a trade candidate mid-season. So I'm not really sure, obviously, why the Knicks did this, given some of their other front court additions, but why Morris switched from the Spurs to the Knicks, even though there was a little bit more money involved. But that even is debatable given the tax situation differences between Texas and New York. Moving on now to arguably the biggest addition for the Knicks this offseason, and that is Julius Randle. And on the surface, I really like this move for them in terms of getting another nice young piece that, if he works out well with this team, could be a pretty core and pretty integral piece of their team moving forward. He had a really good season statistically in New Orleans after leaving the Lakers, obviously the year before in restricted free agency, and provides a really nice inside presence for them. He continues to develop some more skills on the perimeter in terms of attacking the rim, a little bit of shooting as well, but just provides good energy on offense, someone that can score around the rim, and again, is a nice young upside piece for this team. He's not going to be great defensively, and the fit is a little bit questionable depending on how well guys like RJ Barrett play with him, but I do like the move initially. And then last up in terms of additions are two kind of perimeter-oriented veteran guys that should provide spacing for this team in Wayne Ellington, and then to a lesser extent, Reggie Bullock. Bullock wasn't a great shooter when he was in LA, so Ellington is obviously much better in that category, but they both should play a similar role in terms of probably coming off the bench, and again, just spacing the floor for some of the younger guys that they're trying to develop more into their future playmakers. Last up now is Elfrid Payton, and he has developed into at least a solid NBA point guard, in my opinion, not necessarily a starting caliber player, but someone that could potentially take that starting spot, again, as we get towards the depth chart from Dennis Smith Jr., depending on how he plays. So he kind of takes up some of the backup minutes at the point guard spot, in my opinion, initially to start the season that Emmanuel Mudiay was taking up at the one at least. And we'll just kind of wait and see how he affects his team. It could be a lot, it could be not at all. Moving on now to subtractions is a player that I just mentioned, and that is Emmanuel Mudiay. And he is one of a few players on that Knicks team last year that were on one-year deals that were expiring contracts, and they were just kind of waiting to see how they would fit and then potentially bringing them back in the following offseason, and Mudiay was a player that they decided not to bring back. He had a really good statistical season, especially compared to his first couple of years in the league, but it was kind of unclear as to whether or not that would actually translate to a different situation or to a winning team, so they decided not to bring him back. They will miss his size, a little bit of defense, a little bit of playmaking, actually a good amount of scoring, surprisingly, from here, but again, they brought in Payton, they have Dennis Smith Jr., so they shouldn't miss him too much at the one. Moving on now in terms of subtractions is another player similar to Mudiay that was on a one-year deal last year that they decided not to bring back, and that's Noah Vonleh. And I was a little bit surprised given Vonleh's youth and the fact that it seemed like he would fit pretty well on this team. I was a little bit surprised that they didn't make more of an effort to bring him back in the offseason. He's a versatile player, someone that has an inside and out game, and again, just like Mudiay, had a bit of a bounce back year last year, but obviously they had different plans in the front court with all these other guys that they brought in, so it makes sense after the fact now that they didn't bring him back because they wanted to bring in all these other guys, but initially it was a little bit surprised because Vonleh did have a good year for them last year. And then last up in terms of subtractions is DeAndre Jordan, and obviously he could be a pretty good player this year for the Nets, kind of remains to be seen. He's kind of up in the air in terms of his productivity as a starting caliber NBA center, but for the Knicks he was mostly just a salary dump in the Porzingis trade. They're really not going to miss him that much. And so overall for the Knicks, they got some good young players, specifically in the front court, that should help them moving forward and could end up being future pieces for them. The questions that I have here is, are they going to have enough minutes to spread around to keep everybody happy and or not hinder the development of some of their younger players? But as long as guys like Randle and Barrett end up working out in a significant way, all the other stuff from this offseason, all the front court players they signed, things like that, all the jokes that have been made about them really won't matter that much. Again, as long as those two players work out, that's really what their offseason is going to be defined by over the next couple of years. Moving on now to the depth chart, and this one is kind of all over the place as you look at it for the Knicks. So as starters, I have Dennis Smith Jr., RJ Barrett, Kevin Knox, Julius Randle, and then Mitchell Robinson. And then off the bench, we've got guys like Elfrid Payton, Frank Ntilikina, Wayne Ellington, Alonzo Trier, Reggie Bullock, Morris Portis, and then Gibson. And as I was trying to put this together, I had to keep like backspacing and adding players and cutting and putting them in all different places because there's actually a lot of options on this Knicks team. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a ton of depth because not all of their options are like super high caliber players, but they do at least have a lot of like mix and match possibilities on this roster, and specifically in the front court. Like I was like, oh, I forgot about Kevin Knox. I need to put him here. I forgot about Bobby Portis. I need to put him here. I forgot about Marcus Morris. I need to put him here. Even guys like Alonzo Trier. Like there are a lot of options here. It just depends on which ones actually work out for them. And for a lot of these players, this could be a defining season of their career in terms of where they go from here, contract-wise or team-wise or whatever, because there's a lot of possibility and opportunity for players on this Knicks roster, but there's also a lot of competition. And again, as I mentioned in the last section, I'm not really sure how they're going to be able to find enough minutes for all these guys, even just the young guys like Knox and Barrett and Randle and Portis. I'm really not sure how they're going to find enough minutes for all of those guys, but when it comes down to it, I would imagine that they're going to end up cutting the minutes of players like, again, Marcus Morris, which makes it even more strange that he would want to go to New York. But I would imagine they're going to start cutting those minutes and prioritize the minutes of their younger players, specifically because they're just really not going to be that good this year. So it doesn't really make sense for them to give Marcus Morris minutes over someone like Kevin Knox in terms of his own development. And the only other thing to note here in terms of their depth chart is I wouldn't be shocked at all if we get to December and players like Portis and Morris are up for trade possibly again once we get to December and they are able to be traded as newly signed players. Those are players that can certainly help playoff teams. It's going to be a wide open race in either conference to make it to the finals, and those could be moves that would push certain teams over the top. So even though, again, it looks kind of crazy that they brought in all these different front court players, maybe that's something in the back of their mind that they're signing guys that they know are going to be helpful and useful for teams that are potentially pushing for the playoffs or pushing for a title to be able to trade them later in December again. So just keep an eye on that. Moving on now to some players to watch, and I really didn't expect to put this guy in this section, but it's Frank Ntilikina, and I've been down on him for a while now. It seems like I'm just not impressed by him. The fact that he really didn't get that many minutes for a Knicks team that was so bad last year was really not a good sign at all. However, there are some signs of life, specifically with his play during the most recent FIBA World Cup with France. Now, it's not like he was blowing the roof off the place. It's not like he was dropping 30 a game or anything, but there were at least some positive signs and some signs of confidence, which I think is the most important thing for him, specifically offensively, is getting that confidence back. And so if that is some steps in the right direction for him, that could potentially transition into some more positive signs this coming season for the Knicks. And there's going to be opportunities in the backcourt for him. As you saw in the depth chart, he should, if he wants to, be able to get some minutes. He might want to be more of a 2 than a 1 at this point in his career, just because his playmaking hasn't really seemed to develop. But if he can work on his shooting, attacking closeouts a little bit, that'll get him on the floor, and then that allows him to showcase what is a very good ability for him in terms of being able to guard and being a really good defensive player. So I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I'm just saying that there are some signs of life for Frank Ntilikina, most specifically from his FIBA World Cup play. So again, just keep an eye on him. And then another player to watch on this Knicks roster is another backcourt player, and it's Dennis Smith Jr. And I've talked about this multiple times. I hate to say bad things about this guy because I've seen him in person so many times growing up in North Carolina. Like, was one of my favorite players initially when he was coming up, and I really had high hopes for his NBA career. But things are kind of rocky for him at the moment. Like, he has to show improvement in terms of efficiency as a scorer and as a playmaker for this Knicks team this upcoming season, because he is at risk. If he has another kind of average season, he's at risk of becoming just another guy in the league. Maybe not even someone that teams view as like a high potential guard that you should invest in, and he could just be someone that kind of survives on flyer contracts for the rest of his career. However, if he plays well with guys like RJ Barrett and Julius Randle, he could establish himself as a true future piece for this team and potentially earn himself a nice second contract with the Knicks. So it's all in front of him for this season. Again, improvements in efficiency, both as a playmaker and as a scorer, and improvement defensively would be a nice little bonus as well for Dennis Smith Jr. This is a hugely important season for him, in my opinion, so definitely keep an eye on. Moving on now to expectations and predictions, and it's really not that difficult to see here. They're not going to be very good. They're not going to make the playoffs. In my opinion, they're going to be one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference, even with all of these guys that they brought in this offseason. In terms of predictions, I've got them about 20 to 25 wins and in contention potentially once again for the first overall pick. Now, there is a little bit of upside with players like Randle and Portis and Morris, and they've got some other young guys, and those could all kind of mesh together and play well. Maybe they could surprise some people and get to like 30, 32 wins, but that's really not their goal. So I really wouldn't see how that would be possible for them, because that's not something that they're going to be pushing for. Again, I'm thinking that the rationale behind signing guys like Marcus Morris, potentially Bobby Portis, is to be able to get some value for them at the trade deadline, and as well, like so many people talked about, getting them up to that salary cap floor that they needed to be at. So again, not anticipating very many big things from the Knicks this year. The most important thing to keep an eye on for them in terms of the future is how well RJ Barrett plays, what Mitchell Robinson shows, what Dennis Smith Jr. shows, how Julius Randle fits in, potential improvements from Frank Ntilikina. All of those things are much more important in terms of predictions or expectations for this team apart from their win total. And again, I can understand a little bit of optimism because of the younger players, because of the offseason additions, but I'm just not seeing it for this team. I'm putting them at about 20 to 25 wins and one of the worst teams in the East. And again, that is very intentional. But there you go. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.